right. Hi, everyone, and welcome. This is Biotensegrity party number 21 with Dr. Martha Eddy. And she's an amazing person. Martha and I have been avoiding each other since the year 1975. And today we finally get to meet. You'll hear more about that. I don't know. It's just going to be great. I'm looking forward to it. I'm here with co-host Chris Clancy in Deep Cove. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Susan. Hi, everyone. Delighted to be here with you all.
And hi, Graham. Graham's in Nottingham, another co-host of ours.
Hello, Susan, and all.
Yeah, and today's co-host is Anastasia Siotis. He's coming from New York City. Hi, Anastasia.
Hi, everybody. Good to see you all.
And then Dr. Martha Eddy is here, our special guest. Hey, Martha.
Hello.
And then we've got our wonderful assistants. Rachel Tudor's doing a lot of behind the scenes work today. Hey, Rachel.
Hi.
And I think Lisa Babiuk is also here. There she is. Hey, Lisa.
Hello, Susan. Hi, everybody.
It's wonderful to have you guys volunteering every week. We appreciate it. Mariana Barreto is off again this week for a well-deserved break. And I'm going to turn it over to Anastasia for the toast.
Okay, well, here I have my smoothie in a wine glass. Looks like a claret version, but anyway, let's see everyone's glasses. Raise your glasses, and here we are toasting Biotensegrity Tea Party number 21, celebrating Martha Eddy.
Cheers.
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 So exciting. Before we get into it, we wanted to hear about our wonderful sponsors without whom, well, they just do a lot to support us and we really appreciate it. Maybe you can tell us about them, Graham?
Yeah, sure, Susan. The Biotensegrity Tea Party is an all-volunteer production of the Stephen M. Levin Biotensegrity Archive and made possible in part through the generous support of our wonderful sponsors. And we'll start with Handspring Publishing in East Lothian, Scotland, producers of highly accessible, easily applied research-based material for movement and manual therapy professionals. The amazing team at Handspring see publishing as an art as well as a science. And for them, it is a human and intellectual enterprise as well as a business. They offer a generous discount coupon to all those on the Biotensegrity Archive mailing list and to our Zoom participants. So get yourself signed up to the biotensegrityarchive.org if you're not on it already. We're also generously supported by Chris Clancy's educational organisation, Embodied Biotensegrity in Vancouver, British Columbia. And for those of you looking to learn more about biotensegrity, Chris's programs are an excellent resource. The membership group, Biotensegrity Trailblazers, meets twice a month. And Chris and Rachel are also offering a free introductory webinar on biotensegrity on August the 19th, which is next Wednesday, and we'll put some details in the chat, I believe. Yes, the Biotensegrity Tea Party is also sponsored by Artifact Pro of Madrid, Spain, where you can find beautiful and wonderfully constructed tensegrity models, including those of the spine and pelvis. Artifact Pro also offers a generous discount coupon to our viewers on the Biotensegrity Archive mailing list and to our Zoom participants. We're also very kindly supported by the British Fascia Symposium in the UK, which not only organises their biannual event, but also several other exciting programmes. So check them out as well. And finally, but not least, for the support of the first Fascia World Congress, which is being held towards the end of September with lots of well-known names, including Stephen Levin and Jean-Claude Gambito and many others. Sign up. We'll put the details on the chat and perhaps on YouTube as well, so you have a look at what's going on. It's all by distance learning, virtual through Zoom or whatever setup they've got. So thank you.
Yeah, and they've got a call for papers, and we'll put the link for that. if you are going to propose a presentation for the first World Congress of Fascia, it says online that they're only accepting through the 22nd, but I have it from Fabiana that date's been changed to the 28th of August. So go ahead and check it out and send in your abstracts. They are specifically asking for people to present on connections between fascia and biotensegrity. Thanks, Graham.
So
Yes,
before
thank
we
you, Graham.
move on, shall we switch views and ask everybody who has their video camera on right now, except of course, Martha and Anastasia, to turn your cameras off. And then what we'll have for our YouTube audience is a picture of the two of you in conversation. Towards that Q&A portion, we'll invite everybody to turn their videos back on so we have the more social feel that we like to cultivate here at the Biotensegrity Party. Okay, is that good?
That's great. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful.
So Martha and I have been avoiding each other since 1975. And when I started working with Steve, at some point, I found something about Martha online and I went running to him and I said, look, check out this woman. She's talking about biotensegrity. She's applying it in her work. And Steve said, oh yeah, she and I have been in touch with each other for years. So she knew Steve before I did. And I love, I love that I finally get to meet you in this setting. What a treat. Who could have seen it coming? Another COVID-19 silver lining for us. And so I look forward to hearing a lot of stories. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Anastasia.
Okay, thank you, Susan. I'm going to bring you back, so you hang out, be close by.
Yeah. Oh, I'm right here.
Great. Okay, so welcome Martha to the Biotensegrity Tea Party. It's so great to have you here. I think that you have a very, very rich history in somatics and dance, and I think it might be interesting before we dive into the biotensegrity connection for you to tell us a little bit about your entry into the somatic education world.
Thanks, Anastasia. First of all, thank you for introducing me to the tea party, because it's just been a hoot, I have to say, to watch some of the ones that I haven't been part of and learn more about this whole community. So hello, everyone, and especially to Stephen as well. I think they actually go hand in hand. I mean, the dancing started at the 92nd Street Y. I happen to be a New York City born and bred kid. And I'm going to share a little bit about the cellular membrane, because I have questions for all of you. Like, I want to know more about the tensegrity model, connecting the glands. I play with it, but is anybody else doing this? And does it have to be through the fascia? And then also through the membranes themselves. So I'm going to get back to the membrane. So I live at what I call a membrane. I lived at the border between East Harlem and what's called now the Upper East Side, but used to be called Yorkville. And sometimes it's still called Yorkville. So between posh, expensive Manhattan, Fifth Avenue and Central Park, kind of Manhattan, Museum Mile, and the worst ghetto at the time in New York City, they said, at least in the media. I'm sure there were other ghettos that were just as bad. So I would cross 6th Street to get to 92nd Street to go to the Y. And there was a tension there. So I'm just gonna start off by saying just going to dance class had different kinds of pulls in it. And just start with that. So I had lots of dance experience, but New York City had abominable junior high schools and not a lot of great public high schools. So I chose to go to Stuyvesant High School. And that was when Stuyvesant had just become a mixed gender school. So there was a class, but there had not yet been a full class of women coming in as freshmen and graduating. I came in as a sophomore, and I ended up going through that school in 2.5 years. But my point is I learned a lot of sciences. But I have to say they were all Newtonian. So that's another part of my early, upbringing. So there's a little social justice in there coming from the fact that I was the daughter of community organizers. There's dance as an avocation, and there's science as the budding of my interests. And so when I got to the same school that Susan was at in 1975, I actually went there in spring of 74, Hampshire College, I was interested mostly in the social sciences, but knew I wanted to keep exercising. And for me, the only exercise that's of real interest is dance. And it's because it's exercise of the soul, not just of the body. And then I am just so proud because right here today is the very person that introduced me to almost everything that I know about somatics. And that is Tara Steppenberg, who's in our group, Tara S. She was my undergraduate dance teacher. And she was studying the Laban Bartenieff work with Irmgard Bartenieff at the Laban Institute. And even better than that, she was co-teaching a course with a student. So already Hampshire, right? Student, senior, but student, Diana Levy, who became one of our great social worker, body psychotherapist, I would say. I mean, I don't even know how she identifies herself, but she uses the Laban Bartenieff work in doing therapeutic work. And they called their course, which was an introduction to Laban movement analysis, The Self That Moves.
Beautiful.
So there we are. We're into investigating ourselves. So the process of learning the Laban work was more somatic than I think a lot of programs. And then I, fast forward a few years, it was like, oh, I haven't really learned that much about non-Newtonian science. There was a course taught by a senior student who now runs a $4 or $5 billion lab, I don't know what, in Canada.
Who's that? Who is that?
Lee Smolin, and his course was called Nature Loves to Hide.
Oh,
and it
what
was
a great title.
Aren't they great? The Self That Moves and Nature Loves to Hide. I mean, I could go on and on, but those two sort of say it all for me. Nature Loves to Hide was on quantum mechanics and how to really understand light and wave. So particle and wave science. And I bring that up because I'm sure this all fits in. And then I had a boyfriend at the time who was really into cymatics. So I just want to pop that word in too, for those of you that may know about cymatics. Because when I looked up cymatics yesterday, they talk about suspensional bridges as related to vibration and sound. Okay, so there's a lot about suspensory activity and sound and vibration. So those are some of my roots of somatics.
That's amazing. That
But there's one other piece, which is
okay.
that Tara lived next door to Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen.
Ah, well, that's a very critical piece. So you have to tell us more.
And she also brought in Steve Paxton and Nancy Stark-Smith to teach.
Who were? Just to tell everyone.
Yes, so these two people were founders of the discipline called contact improvisation, which is another movement form that really looks at bodies in space, both getting you close enough so you can lift a body, but also how you find balance between bodies. So I was learning contact improvisation for the first time after having been a modern dancer at the Graham School and the Lamon's technique and all of that in New York. And so delighted that Tara was continuing with the Lamon dancing. And then, but just like many people dancing, but also just growing or doing a lot of drugs at Hampshire, we had aches and pains. And so with the aches and pains, it was so great to start learning about the anatomy of the body and the embodiment process. And so I became a junkie for the summer programs with Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen, starting in 1976, every summer.
Wow.
Well, and I think one more thing that relates to you.
More. Bring it on.
Hampshire College. Think about it, Anastasia. Who else was teaching at Hampshire College in the
Hell yeah. Well, the late, actually the late 70s, early 80s was Moshe Feldenkrais's second and last Feldenkrais training with 240 students on the floor in the gym at Hampshire College.
And
Yeah.
so he let us visit. So I
Yeah.
got to watch Moshe teach.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
So
So
thank
I
you,
wanna-
Tara.
Yeah, Tara's been with this group since the beginning too. And I just, immediately just to connect this idea to something that Steve talks about a lot, and the non-Newtonian idea, the idea of the spine being able to accept forces omnidirectionally. I mean, contact improvisation doesn't stand on those ideas of, we have this stacked organization. So it's a beautiful example of that ability of our system to adapt, our skeleton, our whole self to adapt to each other. So beautiful. Martha,
Can I pipe in?
yeah, please. What were you doing, Susan, at Hampshire College?
Smoking pot, man. I don't know. Actually, my first summer at Hampshire, I stayed in town instead of going to live on the vineyard. And I lived in a house down the road on Bay Road with Stephen Petronio.
Oh my! Who Martha very recently performed with.
Correct.
Company, right?
Stephen and I did a duet in New York City as part of his season last year in April.
And just so you don't get lost in the Stephen weeds, I'll also say that Stephen Schafferman's here today.
I saw.
And yeah, and he's a longtime DC Big person. When he teaches FlexAware, he brings Biotensegrity in. And of course, he was Moshe's assistant, I believe, at that time, and was at Hampshire that summer as well. So there you go.
Oh my God, if we just dig a little deeper, we'll find even more.
I'm backing off.
So, but let's now maybe, there's so much to say. Firstly, I think before we dive directly into your Biotensegrity encounters, even though it's already there, maybe just to say a little bit about Bonnie and her work, because when I met Martha, I don't know, in the early 2000s, I was in the first cohort of the condensed program at the Laban Institute of Movement Studies in New York. And when Martha taught us, she brought so much of Bonnie's work into the LMA work, Laban Movement Analysis work. And I was immediately struck as a biologist at the biological membrane interface, the whole idea of cellular breathing, the notion of cells being the dynamic cells that they are. Could you tell us a little more about Bonnie's work and how that informed what you then went on to develop?
Thank you for that opportunity. I've been having fun. Bonnie's doing online teaching for the first time. And so I feel like I just saw her yesterday, and we talk on the phone a lot. Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen studied dance with Eric Hawkins, and also taught anatomy for a lot of dancers. She also trained at The Ohio State University in occupational therapy. And while she was there, she took many dance classes with the dance department. Vicki Blaine, I believe, is one of her strongest mentors. In any case, a dancer, mover, occupational therapist who has a gift that is quite phenomenal with perceiving where, I would say, tensions need to be unblocked through whole body thinking. And her language is different. She generally talks about two strands of knowledge that relate to embodiment and somatics. One is how we evolve as a species, but really ontologically from conception through to death, and looking at patterns that are useful in kind of understanding and assessing where some of these blocks are that I referred to before. So she spent a lot of her time as an occupational therapist working with babies, and has some miracle stories. We call them miracle because a lot of people don't understand the science of what we're doing. where she's helped children that were in severe birth trauma or children that drown as toddlers regain language, regain motor functioning, regain. And so I was just fascinated by that. At the time I met her, maybe I think around, in order to pay for her workshops, I would teach in a preschool during the summers. And so I've also been very invested in working with children. So this approach made great sense to me because I could see with 3 and 4-year-olds that some of them were dragging their legs or others couldn't jump with the others. And it also related to me very much right away to social emotional behavior and how kids would tease each other around physical variation and ability. So that's one strand. It's called Neurocellular Patterns. And the reason she says neurocellular is if you think embryologically, we don't really have a nervous system before we have a cell. We have a cell first. So there's a certain amount of knowledge in the cells, and then the nervous system helps us gain access to a certain kind of awareness, but there's also a kind of integrity of knowledge from the cell itself. Then the second strand relates to the cells, and that is tissue. Right. And that we work with any tissue through, and this is my language, I don't hear her talking about tissue that often. We talk about systems, the physiological systems, but we don't look at them physiologically. I figured this out trying to teach her work when a lot of people couldn't understand it back 40 years ago. I got teased in an article that they wrote on me in New York Woman magazine, where it said, yes, she's telling people to breathe into their kidneys. People poo-poo this, but some people say it works. You know, that was the kind of language in this little article. And that was probably in the 80s. Basically, if we can become aware of the different systems that we have, and I group them by tissue, so organ tissue, muscle tissue, organs obviously have a lot of variety, but there's this sense of volume and containment. Then fluids as a type of tissue in a way, very water-based, nervous system tissue, neural, skeletal, and then endocrine. And then the catch-all, which is what this group is so profoundly knowledgeable about. We call it skin, fat, and fascia, the soft tissue. And I, pretty early on with all of this, by the way, relating to this group, figured out that there were whole systems one could study about any one of these. For instance, the cranial sacral or cerebral spinal fluid. You could study cranial sacral therapy. And I did go on to do that. As a manual, someone doing hands-on work with BMC, I went and dug in. I studied VOD or manual lymphatic drainage so that I could understand that better. So the point is, it's a very broad exploration of the hugeness of the internal landscape, the universe of the body. And it's about embodiment through touch, through movement, and through sound. So there's where the vibrational sound becomes important too.
I think in that tuning in that Bonnie teaches us to sense through our hands, that the subtle, the quality of different tissues, of different organs, and their cellular expansion, and the expansion and contraction piece is so profound in her work, even to the point where she says, my anatomy is phenomenological. You won't find some of this in an anatomy book. This is from my experience. And she has this incredible gift to bring people to be able to sense those things for themselves. So I think that's amazing. So Martha, can we now go maybe a little, I mean, there's so many things to say, but I maybe we go a little toward the idea of, because you mentioned the glands, and you have an upcoming book with Handspring that is, maybe you want to talk about it. It's still in progress, but for those that are interested in the fascial glands connection, maybe would you say something about that?
Sure. I mean, it's a perfect dovetail with the Bonnie story. So one of the things I love about Bonnie is she loves to explore and move. So as a young student with her, we did a lot together socially, and that included taking yoga classes.
Mm.
And so I would say in about 1976, 77, I started studying with Jeannie Erbaum in South Amherst, Massachusetts, in the library, community room. And what stayed with me from that practice was, one, I learned to meditate and I went deeper into meditation. And the second is that I really loved the Sun Salutation, even though it's very sagittal. And we'll talk more about that.
When was this? Just the date again? When were you doing this?
The late 70s.
Late
So
70s.
all through the
Okay.
70s.
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
later, when I lived in New York in the 80s, Bonnie and I would go take trapeze, low-flying trapeze lessons together. So, you know, we know how to have fun. And the trapeze work is, of course, really important to this work as well. I mean, talk about suspension and compression. I could go a lot, many places with aerial somatics. So I then loved a piece of her work, which was relating, well, okay. The other thing is you talked about the phenomenology of her process.
Right.
So there's two stories here that relate to the glands, actually.
Mm.
One is that I believe it was actually, I don't remember, but probably 78 or no, it was 1976. 76 was the year that we were just studying glands for the summer.
Mm.
And everybody got sick. So that was a learning. So part of what I'm trying to say is that she also labbed with us. We all were figuring this work out together, right? So, for instance, we distinguish between bodies and glands. Glands have known hormones. Bodies are places that either are known as bodies, like the carotid or the mammillary, but are not known to have, or were not, and this is important for the phenomenological story, not known to have a secretion, a hormone. So back to that year, she realized, I need to ground glandular work in movement, in kind of bone and muscle kind of movement. So what she ended up doing was relating it to the developmental movements, to how a baby, how would a baby come into glandular work? And I think it was actually me, because I was the person teaching the nervous system and the brain and the neuroscience for the program, because I fast tracked into becoming a teacher like that. And I said, Bonnie, did you notice that when we're doing a simple series of hers, if you do one way, you're kind of alternating between the glands up here and the glands down here. But it's actually, if you alternate, and this is getting technical, but push and reach, and that certainly relates. I think the easy way to translate that is push as compression and reach as suspension, and elongation, not stretch. I watched that, number 19. So basically, then you started to see that the baby's development was more organized. In one case, more around the brain, in the other case, more around the glands. So just something to play with. It's too much detail for me to go into now. But what I want to share is that I then started playing with the glands, very specifically with the Sun Salutation. And that's what this book is about. It's about how you can use a practice, a ritual, one that exists in yoga that has already talked about the chakras, and then get a little more biological with it and really look at what are the chakras possibly made of. And different people have different theories. Bonnie's theory is it's where the plexus and the glands come together. So where you have a large plexus and a large glandular kind of component. So I'm going to say two more things and then I'll pause. One is that the heart bodies, which, we all think about the heart chakra. I was studying with her for 10 years before science, and it came out of Canada in 1986. They found that there were glandular functioning in the heart region. At first, I heard it was aortal. Now I'm reading it's atrial in the actual heart tissue. And so whether or not there are two different ones, it's a little hard to really even parse out in science. I've been doing quite a lot of research just trying to find this. But in any case, what we felt as chakral energy also being glandular was panned out in science. So she will
Beautiful.
often say, you know, a lot of science is based on dead bodies, cutting up dead bodies. But when the vitality is gone, you're not going to see half of it. We need to explore it physically.
Right. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Thank
Then I
you.
want to come to this, but I'll wait. This relates to Laban. So
Oh,
I'll pause.
well, maybe. Well, you met Bonnie at the time that you did, but was that also coinciding with your then moving into the Laban studies? And Bonnie was one of the founding people, I think, right? Or maybe a little
She was an
after.
early student. She
Early
studied
student,
with Bonnie, I think either somewhere between 73 and 75. So, and she moved up to Amherst in 1976. So she
Right.
had just studied with Irmgard. Two things, again, they totally relate. One is Bonnie did not have a certification program. So I had been studying with her for 5 years already and kind of going, two things. When does this end? Maybe never. And guess what? It doesn't. 42
It
years
doesn't.
later, I'm
Yeah.
still studying with her.
She's still going.
She's still going. And I'm so proud that I, you know, can have this person that can shift to internet and just keep sharing with us. But also, Tara had introduced us to Irmgard's work and her creation. What I like to say, she created the curriculum to teach people to become certified movement analysts using Laban movement analysis. So she kind of, where the term was Laban analysis and the term was out there, she was the first person to design a curriculum to teach people of all different professions. So yes, there were many dancers, but no, there were also therapists and sports psychologists is what's coming to mind, but some fitness folks in my training years. It goes on and on. Cultural anthropologists, dance anthropologists. It's a mixed group. She felt that she was training people that already had a profession to enhance their profession through understanding human movement.
So maybe I'll show her book here. It's called Body Movement, and that's her name if you need to look that up. And, you know, Irmgard was, as I understand it, one of Laban's dancers in Berlin before she came to the United States. And maybe to bring this to the whole idea of, you know, why would we be even bringing him up? But, you know, Laban was very interested in the idea of the Platonic solids and the idea of, you know, moving in the cube, moving inside the icosahedron. And I thought maybe I should just quickly show a little photograph of Laban from one of my slides. So just hang on one second. I'm going to screen share. Can you all see that? Wait,
It'd be nice if you could make it bigger, maybe.
Yeah, let me just open that. There we go. Is that? So
Great.
this is just an early, you know, early stone figures of people playing with the geodes and making shapes. There's a Roman icosahedron, and then we have a photograph here of Laban on the left here holding an icosahedron. Or no, actually no, he's holding something a little bigger than that. But then on the right, he's standing inside. And we, when we study Laban movement analysis, we all end up constructing such a thing and then moving inside it and playing with movement scales. And so maybe I think that's all I want to show. Yeah, let me just stop that screen share and go back. Whoops, go back to you, Martha. So if you want to say a little about your history with that.
Sure. So Tara took us to an anniversary conference. I believe we might have been celebrating a birthday. Yeah, I think it was maybe his, I don't know, it's 1979. It might have been his 100th birthday at Teachers College at Columbia University. And that was very impressive to me to just see how people were applying the work. And in particular, Virginia Reed was a dance movement therapist doing medical work. And for some reason, I've just always been drawn to health and healing. It actually didn't come up at Hampshire College. It didn't really come up at Stuyvesant, but somehow maybe through the hands-on work with Bonnie, I just felt like, yeah, this is really a very creative and loving field, and it felt appropriate. And I especially working with kids, as I mentioned before.
And
So
that's been your thing. I mean, really, if I think about it, everything you're doing, be it whichever community you're involved in, be it women, be it people, survivors of various conditions, it's totally about whole health and movement. So we've got to get into your programs. But anyway, I interrupted
well,
you.
it's
Go
funny,
first.
no, because today I left early from my body, mind, dancing training program, and Sherry Greenspan's here, who followed up and taught from 12 to 1 for me so that I could transition to this. And I asked the students, go talk to each other in breakout groups. What are your personal goals as they relate to the goals of this body of dance, somatic dance system, body, mind, dancing? And they came back and all of them said, basically, it's healing something. We don't know what, different people heal different things, but it's about health and healing. So spot on, yes.
Yeah.
So with Laban, I knew that I wanted to get a certification. I was like, all right, I'm studying, but where's it taking me? And then I also knew that I wanted to observe more carefully. And Bonnie's work has an incredible observational component to be able to see when someone's compressing their liver or overexpanding through the spleen. I mean, we really do see that, but we don't spend a lot of time practicing it. So there's not feedback around whether you're seeing accurately. And I guess the scientist in me, this is where, Stuyvesant High School kind of comes in, wanted feedback on my accuracy and research tools. And that's what I got at the Laban Institute. So one of the beauties of Irmgard's work is that she modeled the multidisciplinarity of the work of Rudolf Laban applied. She was a dancer, yes, but then she couldn't find work as a dancer when she escaped Nazi Germany. So she was married to a Russian Jew. She becomes a physical therapist. She applies Laban thinking to physical therapy and helps people that have polio that have been in bed for months or weeks or whatever, not progressing, get up and walk because of something we call spatial intention. And I'm going to take a moment because it really is Irmgard that drew me to the Laban work, and then I'll talk some about Laban, and this will do it. I just went and looked up.
Hold on, Martha.
Yes.
Can you show us the cover?
This is the same book, but an earlier version, I guess.
All right.
That
And
Anastasia just showed, or maybe it's an older one. I have no idea.
Oh, that's the earlier. You've got the earlier one.
Yeah, this is the one I had from her. I don't have a signed copy. I wish I did. And I remember when Fran Parker, who was co-teaching with Irmgard, her signed copy got stolen. But anyway.
And Martha, you held up another book earlier. And people are saying, what was that book?
I'm going to get to that when I get to Laban. Okay.
Fabulous. Thank you.
Here we go. I won't lose that thread because it relates back to the glands. But I just looked up, I was looking for tensegrity and I didn't find it. But I want you to hear these words in the index. I'm just reading the index. Tensions and countertensions. Goes from 103 to 25. That's 22 pages on tensions and countertensions. Then there's a few other straggling pages. Center of initiation. Then another section on countertensions, then mini countertensions, then dance and the tensions in dance, then examples of chordic tensions. We're talking about musical chord-like chords. So we talk about that geodesic, that sacred platonic positioning in space as chords. We work with chordic tensions. Comparison of tensions, sequences for tensions, countershaping and effort, countertension, peripheral and transversal sequences in animal and human actions, renewing countertension. She was interested in sustainability, same movement activity by many different people. She was interested in variation and individuality, spiral shaped tensions of spiral shapes. 3 Commedia dell'arte figurines and their countertensions, 2 musicians and the contrast between them, utmost mobility, the dance of Mikhail Barteniev is her husband, walking, rehabilitation and countertension, work action, 2 construction workers compared, spatial tensions, the paths of spatial tensions, the spatial intent, Then it just so happens that after tension is tetrahedron. So I have to go on for 3 more. Tetrahedral tensions, tetrahedron, and then we move into therapy. So that's just your index. You have also under space, similar kinds of intensities. Space effort, space harmony, goes on for on and on and on. Spatial intention, spatial paths, spatial shaping, spatial zones of action, etc., etc.
And this was her evolution of what she had studied with Laban, but it was in there in the beginning, like it was his work, and then she developed that into
Exactly.
and you know, we study body, effort, shape, and space best, the 4 components, but Irmgard really brought the body into the exploration of shape and form. So I think that's really beautiful that you listed just that.
I mean, I just was like,
it.
wow,
Yeah.
isn't that amazing, right? So
Yeah.
her book is like a Bible. I can only read about a page at a time.
It's
And I
dense.
do believe I have read every page, but there's one line I use all the time. And I think it's on page 21. Yeah, exactly. And that page, that one line is preparation. And that's a lot. We can talk about preparation if we want. Initiation and spatial intention determine the course of an action. So how we are going to move is totally dependent on knowing where we're going in space, having a sense of where it begins from, the origins, and that preparation could be, what's your degree of connectivity already? And that word connectivity is where we get into fascia. And Irmgard was trained as a physical therapist. She chose to go back and study. And when I say back, I heard that she was in England, but also in Germany to study Bindebewegungsmassage, which is connective tissue massage. And she did connective tissue massages on each of us. So I have her hands in my body working with the fascial pulls and the dermatomes and how they impact other parts of the body.
And many people in the work who went on to continue teaching in the work actually include that connective tissue therapy.
Exactly. She has a whole lineage
training.
where John Chanik, for instance, and some
and
of
Jackie
his,
Hand
and Jackie and Miss Wheeler worked together to keep her
Right.
work alive, calling it connective tissue therapy. So I mentioned Virginia Reed, and here's this book that Susan was asking about. So Virginia Reed was teaching the Laban theory classes in this curriculum developed by Irmgard Bartenieff, developed together with a lot of wonderful people, including Virginia. And I'm going to show it slowly.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
The moment's coming. So this book was not exactly a curricular, centerpiece. It's simply something she was reading at the time that she was interested in. And why she was interested, and this is a very old book, so I can't hardly open it, but can you see the chakras and what is inside each of the chakras? See the sacred forms?
Beautiful.
So remember, I'd been studying yoga. I had heard of chakras, maybe from Bonnie, I have no idea, and that we were working with the glands. So we're back to the glands. I love it. Tara says she brought this book to Irmgard to show it to her. I love it. So, so we can ask Tara more. So I go, let me learn more about the chakras. And I marched myself down to East West Bookstore, and there wasn't a single book on the chakras. Well, now it's a whole other story. So this is all I had to hang on to. And so it's things like the crown chakra holds the dodecahedron, and the octahedron is where the heart chakra is, and the tetrahedron is more the solar plexus, and the icosahedron, the center of mobility, is in the pelvis, and the cube is at the root chakra. So that's his philosophy, and I work with that some in this book. So you were asking about the book. And so then what I did with it feels very much about biotensegrity, which is, I've been through Lyme disease. I have quite a bit of arthritis now in my neck. I love dancing. I dance a lot, but I also spend a lot of time typing, keyboarding, and I've got 2 book contracts right now. I write curriculum. I have to grade student papers. I teach at Marymount. So I'll just show you my range of motion. If anybody wants to do these movements now, this might be a good time to do it. But so this is actually pretty good today. There are days when I really just can't get my chin much past here until I start to move. And so one could think about fascial movement, and I'm in love doing that. And I'll talk a little bit more about interstitial movement in contrast to fascial movement if you're interested, using the BMC perspective. But in this case, I'm working with glandular action. So remember, I put them together with the developmental movement because of Bonnie Cohen's guidance. So we relate the glands to the joints, which is pretty typical in yoga, but she really mapped it out with this developmental piece. I've had frozen shoulder. How many of you have had frozen shoulder? How many of you have felt some kind of shift with the thyroid, either post 9/11, New York, or in aging? So I'm dealing with thyroidal issues, shoulder issues, and then I find out from a Japanese student of mine that in Japan, they call menopause, and I'm also getting older, they call menopause in China, in the Japanese language, they actually call it frozen shoulder. So that there's already a common knowledge that at that perimenopausal and menopausal stage, there's a likelihood one could experience frozen shoulder. So I'm like, why? Well, I'm relating it to the thyroid gland, the throat chakra. And here in this action, this is a BMC concept. We work with fulcrums, just as all of you do. And we work with them both with compressional support, as compressional supports, but also as suspensional supports. So where suspension can be very much about endpoints, we can also look at that top point of the arc. And I just want to riff with any of you about this because I'm sure you know a lot more of the technicalities of it. But in BMC work, body, mind, centering, we work mostly doing that with organs. I've been choosing to play with the glands in that way within. So just to end the movement, if anybody wants to play with it, this particular one is to go into a suspensional support with the precision of spending time with the tissue underneath the cartilage. So you're really into the H-shaped thyroid gland around the, I'm going to use the non-technical language of the Adam's apple, and really suspending from it if it's not compressing your spine in any way that feels injurious to you at this moment. You can stay there for a while. I instantly feel a pull on my shoulder, even though, quote, I've healed that right shoulder. My voice is getting a little tremory. I need to find my breath. So I spend more time here deepening into my pelvis and feet and deepening the breath through the throat, neck, and head, and just hang off of the thyroid as a stimulus to the thyroid and to open the fascial tissue through my shoulders, out through my fingers, and also down through my pelvis into my feet. Now I'm going to use, and you can do it, you can come up on your own, but I'm going to use hand support, a manipulation of my head to bring myself up, and then find integration here. That's my little movement share.
So that was almost like, when you demonstrated the line coming out, there was a total countertension scenario there where you're playing with gravity and your intention and your point of initiation, and then feeling the connections, let's say.
The multi-dimensional countertensions, right? Well, omnidirectional. Yes, not just this one, but also the supports in depth and width. Yeah.
So Martha, I feel like there's so many other things to say, but I do want to bring us to this idea of this other aspect of what you've done. Maybe I have to also say that, Martha has written another book, an earlier, 4 years ago, 5 years ago?
4 years, yeah.
Yeah, 4 years. Mindful Movement, which is like the history of somatic studies. And I mean, you could talk about that, but I
I'd love
also
to
want to,
take 5 minutes with that because I think
yeah,
it's nice for people to know. And
yeah,
I think we need to map the biotensegrity story here. And maybe I can do a little
yeah,
spontaneously. It has not been my life work, so I'm not going to be a genius about that. But here is a PowerPoint that I often do about the book. And I'm just to Susan's question. She had a question on modes of inquiry. So I hope that just by talking about nature loves to hide versus the self that moves at Hampshire, you saw the multidisciplinarity. I was studying socialist feminist economics when I was there. And then I realized I wasn't going to learn Chinese, and I was studying Chinese Revolution, blah, blah, blah. I did a lot of different things, but I got back to dance because it felt practical, but I wanted to work with kids. So this will relate to my applications. Here's an application. So how many of you have been taught the 5 senses and you've counted them on your fingers? How many of you know the 6th sense? Oh yeah, is that a ESP or is it body awareness? Oh, how many of you have broken that down to kinesthetic sense? And so it could be the kinesthetic sense and the proprioceptive sense, right? So proprioception, different kinds of registration, then movement, which is kinesthetic. So I said, I'm teaching kids. Let's teach them about 10 senses. That way they can use both hands. So we've got, eyes and ears and mouth and nose and skin. And then over here under our skin, we've got tension that we can feel and shape that we can feel. So that's you're pulling on your Golgi tendons and the joint compression makes shape. Then standing tall is kind of getting at the inner ear and the otoliths, and the stopping and starting, so important for kids with ADD and ADHD, is getting into the inner ear, right? So now we're inside the registers for the kinesthetic awareness and the labyrinths and cochlea, which I just have to spend time with because I hope everybody here already knows that the labyrinths are at 90 degrees to each other. So you've got one in the horizontal, one in the vertical, and one in the sagittal. However, they don't sit in our bodies that way. They sit at 45 degrees. So they're designed to read going off vertical, okay?
right.
So that's where the stand tall and the stop start and the tilt fall come from. All right.
Yeah, that whole tilt fall, the idea, the sense that we have is the acceleration away from the high point. So it's really, that's beautiful. I love that you're teaching that to kids.
Yeah,
It's fantastic.
It's like, that's how we're going to learn this stuff, right? That's how the culture is going to shift, is when it's in schools. And I'm very excited right now. Most of my body mind dancing teachers in this particular cohort are working with 2 to 7-year-olds. So it's just a whole new thing. I also make a big distinction between mind body and body mind. Now, I'm not so fussy about it, but I do think it's very different to use the mind to perceive and control the body than it is to really mine the body for its wisdom. So that's just a quick slide. And then I wanted to get us here. And this is a fairly ugly slide in my book. It's been redone in concentric circles, but it's this is color, so it's kind of fun. And
maybe you could enlarge it, Martha, because it's
oh yeah, of course. I'm not even in the slideshow. Play from start. It's just this thing is in the way.
I'm looking
Play
up the
from
one in
current
the book.
slide. I apologize. I should have done that a long time ago. Okay, so for those of you, I just can't get into all the history here, but certainly let me think. Gerda Alexander is over here in the far right. She was working with the bones in a very special way, in a very deep and embodied way. And I wouldn't be surprised if she's got some countertension ideas in there, in the way that you find with the torquing and understanding of the spiral of the bone. Ida Rolf clearly was working with fascia, Charlotte Selver with awareness of everything in daily life, Milton Traeger, freer, lighter, softer. How do you get there? with making space in the body. You can't be lighter without spaciousness. Same with Alexander. So one of the things I want to share is that I took time to study these 40 systems and find what was common about them. I had just done my doctoral dissertation with cross-case analysis, qualitative analysis of different schools that were teaching peace education and violence prevention. So I had this methodology and I said, what do they have in common? What are they doing well? And I'll go to that slide next if I can figure out how to move them. Here they go. So just, oh, it's a ways. So enjoy the pictures because we may not get back to this. Here's this one. Now, this one is emphasizing the parasympathetic quality of most somatic work. It's about relaxing, doing less, finding efficiency. So we are slowing down to breathe and lying down to get gravitational force out of the system for a little bit, a while, to reintegrate, relearn, release tension. But what I didn't expect to be common, because I was such a Laban snob, was that every somatic system, and especially I think of the reverse work in Feldenkrais, has an understanding of the three-dimensional body. And certainly Rolf did. So Laban uses words like shaping. We dance and move within the crystalline forms, the sacred solids, and we work with, I'm just giving you keywords, you've heard them.
Martha, could you just hold on counter tension, because Chris Clancy was asking, what do you mean by counter tension? Is it something to do with the force of compression? Would you just say a little more on counter tension? Because
Sure.
when we move within the crystalline form, we're moving within movement scales, which
So I'm
provide,
going to invite people to move too, if you want. And maybe I should stop the screen share so we can just really see our bodies. So I'll tilt so you see a little bit more of my body. So one of the, that was too much. Laban was really interested in just the basics, right? So we've got up and down, we've got side to side, which can be cross or open. We've got back and forward as the cardinal dimensions. But then from there, we go all sorts of places within the icosahedron, or within ballet, we might go out to the octahedron. I mean, there's just a lot of different ways to play with movement there. But what I'm getting at is that within that first dimension, any of those three, there's a direction of pull that is bidirectional, right and left, up and down, forward and back. So countertensional pulls will get very specific. If I'm going a little to the right, let's say a little to the right, and a lot up, and slightly, and very forward, then I need a little to the left. You can't see, I'll do the other arm, you can't see my leg. A little to the left, not too much to the left, because that will no longer be a countertensional force. You want precision. You want to find that little side to sideness, that lots of forward and backness, and that lots of up and downness. Hope that's helpful. It's the bidirectional forces. And what happens is a countertension stabilizes you. And then when one of the pulls is greater, you fall. But hopefully you have reflexes, which include a great connectivity that allow you to fly or catch.
Wow. So Martha, it's nearly it is actually 2 o'clock right now. So it's the top of the hour and we're going to open it up to having people's questions. But before we go there, I feel like it's so important to get one more point in, which is this idea, because you touched on it when you talked about social aspects, but you're actually the Geraldine Ferraro Fellow for Social Justice and Movement. Now that is an incredible title. Would you explain a little about what that is?
Yeah, I thought I brought it in here, but I'm not seeing it. Did anybody see the New York Times? It was either yesterday or the day before. That was on social. It was on social movements and movement, and it was an article on teens, basically, some college students in Berkeley, mostly African-American, including dance in the protest movement that's happening right now. So that's just one example of using dance in social movement. What I want to just beam about is that that particular child or woman studied at one of the sites that I found 30 years ago as one of the only places really teaching violence prevention and conflict resolution using movement, and was part of my doctoral research. So
Wow.
Destiny Arts Center is still alive and creating dance creative artists, and I'm sure the musicians and drummers were out there too, and video artists, and probably graphics had to go into advertising the moment. So we need our arts for social movement. And I have been studying that for a long time, partially because I grew up in the inner city, in a ghetto in East Harlem, and my parents were community organizers, and so it's in my blood. But I was always interested in how does movement fit in. One of the things I did, and this will sort of be the last story, was that I was drawn to a woman I met in another healing training I did, which is holistic training for healers with Eugene and Eva Graff in Massachusetts. We studied herbology, massage, all kinds of esoteric stuff as well, and probably the crystals as well. And basically Linda Lantier was there, and she was from East Harlem, and she was running a school in East Harlem, and it was a school focused on wellness. And I was like, this is my mentor. And so I tracked her, I followed her, and she created for the New York City Public Schools a curriculum in nutrition education, a curriculum in sex education, and then was moving into a curriculum in peace education that came from starting with resolving conflict creatively and teaching 5 to 18-year-olds how to resolve their own conflicts. So I trained in that, but there was something missing, and that was movement. And so I became the movement person for them. How can we do this experientially? How can we feel in our body where the trauma is? Where can we move it out? How can we work with it? So when Susan, during Biotensegrity T19, pulled out her particular model that she has, and Susan, I don't know if you're hearing me, and you can unmute and
Yeah,
photo
Susan,
and bring out your model.
Come back in.
Yeah,
and show
here it
us.
is.
There
Okay,
you go.
so she's doing this, and I'm going like back to me being on 100th Street, walking to 92nd Street, and pulling and pushing and just feeling. And you were saying things like, if one part is affected, the whole is affected. And so this is the bottom line right now in racial oppression. If we don't fix it as the predominantly white folk that tend to be in this environment, we're all going to still be a slightly jammed up system. We have to work this way. And we have the skills by understanding these tensile forces.
The interconnection. Beautiful. So, Susan, you're there, and maybe we can bring.
Oh, I think that I was showing it, but you couldn't see it because in order for I have to make noise, I think, in order to appear on, because we've got it in speaker mode or something. So I think when I speak, maybe then people can see.
Okay. Yeah, maybe.
Go ahead, Anastasia.
Oh, well, no, I'm just saying, a lot of people have been writing into the chat. I haven't been tracking that so much as keeping keeping with Martha, because that's a pace to keep.
Everybody's been lapping it up, and I've been drinking it in glug, glug, glug as well. We did tell people we would say something about how we almost met.
Yes.
Finally, today
Yes.
we get to meet.
Please talk about the near encounters, the near misses, and then this is
right.
The actual
so about
meeting.
Steve, I mean, it comes back to Dr. Levin, right?
So let's hear the story.
Here I am, part of this Laban world where we're moving inside of these sacred forms with countertensions, tensile forces. And I haven't even shared with you that my brother, 4 years older than me, as his high school project, actually did not get his high school degree because his school was upset that he hadn't completed his building of a geodesic dome that he then lived in for the next 15 years. Even though he had gotten into Yale, and he was so pissed off he didn't go to Yale. So, like, what are schools about? I don't get it. But anyway, whoops, I muted myself. We'll go back to gallery view. The whole way that Biotensegrity showed up with the Rolf movers first in Amherst. And then the Laban work was just resonating in me. And then I heard about Steve's work and it's like, we've got to know this. And the other Laban geeks are going to want to know this. And so I knew he was down closer to the DC area. So I said, you know, to Carol Boggs, who's here, and a few other people, you know, would you be interested? And they said yes. And then it turns out Susan went. And it turns out something in my life happened and I either got sick or something came up and I couldn't go. So I never met Steve and I never met Susan. So here we are today meeting, which I'm so grateful for.
Right. And I love that you're bringing up, Martha, that there are a lot of people here today that knew each other before and when, and we pointed out some of them. And of course, Carol Boggs, you just said, is one of them. And she's a longtime DC Big person. And I haven't really had time to look through the whole list of participants. So people will have to speak up. You talked about Tara is here.
She is.
Tara is here. You should, Tara, if you're still here, you could just
show yourself.
unmute yourself, show yourself, open your video.
And I would just say that,
There she is. Oh,
yeah, if you unmute yourself, Tara, and speak, then we'll all see you. And also if we all go to, we like to do this in the later kind of part of things where we go into gallery view and go ahead and turn your videos back on. And then when people have questions, they can unmute themselves. And I will say, Steve Levin, that there's specifically a request that you pipe in if you are so moved as well. So.
Well, I'm here, but I find my role more as a listener than a talker at these things. I talk enough and I like to hear what everybody else is talking about. And if they've absorbed everything that I've said and want
Professor
to,
Stephen Levin.
that's fine.
You're unmuted.
I didn't unmute?
you're good.
Keep
Okay.
going, Steve, keep going.
Well,
Yeah.
that's all. I just, you know, I said, I like to sit in the background in these things and just absorb all this information. It's fascinating to me because my background isn't as a dancer, but in college I was a wrestler, which is the same thing in many ways. And so you pick up all the same kind of things. And I was interested, Martha's talked about her trapeze explorations. And in one of my talks, I talked about using a swing as moving your center, learning how to move your center of mass so you redistribute all the forces. And essentially that's what this is all about. It is really how to understand how to move that center of mass in the body. The center of mass in the body only moves maybe in a 5 centimeter diameter circle, or probably a helix, but you're moving it in about 5. And every part of your body is directed to keep that center of mass from falling on your face.
I'd love to respond to that one because there was a day that I was in class with Irmgard and she said, they did it, they did it. And we're like, you know, what did they do and who are they? And she goes, the Russians. And we're like, okay, what did the Russians do, Irmgard? And she goes, it's a figure 8, it's a figure 8. And she said, and then we like, what are you talking about? When you stand still, she says, we're moving in a figure 8. They used force plate analysis and they proved it. And this is in 1980. Yeah. So she was so excited about that helix that you were just talking about, that is constantly underfoot or seated.
Tara, can you unmute and say hello?
Tara, she's here.
Yes,
ahead,
I'd be
Tara.
happy to say hello. I have of course loved this day. I also want to say that Carol Boggs was my Laban teacher. And I love that when I've come on to this tea party, I love seeing her there, and I know Diane. I wanted to, well, of course, I always learn from Martha. And I loved the description today about your integration of the felt experience of moving through space. And that, again, there's a mirroring of macro level and micro level, but that just experiencing where you are in a large environment, that one can feel the forces of energy within that and my relationship to it on both a physical, emotional, and really the social body. I've been reading a little bit from my grandmother's hands and really appreciating the idea of a social body, or the cultural choices that have been in a way made for me that I can then play with and dance around and shift. I can shift some of those patterns and the responsive patterns of the way my body literally relates in different social settings. So I really appreciate that connection. I could feel it. I mean, because I know the streets you're talking about. And the other thing I wanted to add is when I was in the CERT program in the early 70s, I had just read that book by Lawrence Blair and brought it to Irmgard, and she was very interested. And one of the interesting parts about this is Lawrence Blair was a practitioner of, I think, something called the Leviathan, which is a Subud practice, and which also has a spatial component. It has a relationship to energy and space and the forces we swim in, inside, outside. And the Subud people used to practice at LIMS, at the Laban Institute, when they were on 21st Street. So every Friday, I think they came and did their Leviathan, which is also what Lawrence Blair did as a spiritual practice. So I think that's a really—
I'd love to jump in on that, because since we've been, celebrating dance a little bit here, the highest experience I ever had as a dancer, I only twice got to perform in the Cunningham studio, and one was with you, Tara, and your choreography with our company, which included Stephen Petronio, I believe.
Yeah.
And then another time was with Sharna Allison, who is one of the only other people who has been a certification teacher, both in the School for Body Mind Centering and in the Laban movement work, Laban Bartenieff movement work. And she choreographed, she's a Subud member, and she was one of those people, she probably brought the Friday classes there. And she choreographed something called Circling the Square. And we were on, talk about vibration, let's get back to cymatics. We were on the lifted stage. So it's only 2 or 3 inches, but you've got that vibrational space. She's got tabla players playing live. So we've got tablas under our feet, 5 of them. And our work is spinning on straight lines. So we're traveling and spinning and feeling those tensional forces and replacing each other. I'm getting chills now. It's like very transformative work.
Wow.
Thank you.
I think there's a question from Chris Frederick in the chat. Who's doing the questions? Who's keeping track of that?
Susan, before we go there, Rachel would like some more information about the interstitium.
Great.
Right, I said I would mention that. So for the interstitium, wow, it's a lot of things. I was talking about the interstitial fluid. Okay. Interstitium, the blood-brain barrier. I mean, there's just so much new science out there. And so I'm not going to be erudite about that, but I will distinguish between fascia and interstitial fluid, which I actually think is the beginning of getting into the interstitium.
And I'm gonna jump in because Martha, do you have 5 more minutes? Or am I right?
Yeah, thank you. I shifted so I can stay till 2:30.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So fascial, I think we all know fascial, and it's layering, and that it's around the organs, it's between the muscles, we've got that. The interstitial fluid is the fluid between the cells. So it has a similar quality of occupying crevices and spaces. Now, in terms of social movement, and someone said this is in my profile, that I move interstitially a lot. I just can get through the cracks. So flowing through resistance is the theme of interstitial fluid. Being able to find the flow despite resistance. Really pretty helpful to have that skill right now. There's a lot of resistance and we need to face it and sometimes use it, but it's helpful if we don't block up and stop our flow. So the interstitial fluid doesn't have the same feeling of weight that the fascia has. And it doesn't connect me right away into my muscles or organs. It's more related to kind of paralleling the lymphatic fluid or the blood flow. So that's the movement life of it. And now I'm using Laban movement analysis to describe it. There's more lightness, there's more flow, but it also manages to shape through small spaces.
Right. So I have Chris Frederick's question here. He'd love to hear about the contrasts in experiencing applied biotensegrity through different dance techniques versus, say, Tai Chi or the different martial arts.
Before you respond to that, can I
Oh, great.
Yes, there are a few people here, Kelly, Clancy, Sue, and Kimmy, whose mics are on, and I can't shut them off. So and Bianca as well. So if you were able to shut off your mics, it would. There's some background noise that I don't know where it's coming from, but that would cut that out. So thank you. Sorry for interrupting there. Go ahead, Martha.
It's okay. I think I got made a host, so I'm muting people.
Okay, and also Chris Frederick has been a professional dancer and has studied Tai Chi and other martial arts. So as well as doing, you saw their presentation on at Tea Party 19. So
yeah, for those of you that didn't get to see Tea Party 19, I highly recommend it. It was actually Tara said, pick one, start with that one. So it was just absolutely fabulous. Chris, I don't see you, but I'm pretending to make eye contact with my memory of you. So basically, yes, we use Laban movement analysis to look at all of these. So it's what we call style analysis. And it's one of the things that makes someone's style evident is what type of space do they like to use. But more than that, we also look at the phrasing. So maybe they like to use diagonals more in the beginning and then wind down into something else, or they stay consistently in the same kinds of space all the time. That would be a more monotone phrasing versus a more emphatic phrasing. These are the elements that get at what someone's style is or what a movement style is. So what I want to share, though, about Tai Chi that comes from my knowledge from Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen is that we're working some with the spatial tensions that come from paying. So in the Laban sense, we would talk about creating peripheral space, being able to, like a mime, mark a territory. So if you choose, obviously we can come in a way as well. But if you want to really have a clarity of an area, you can define that. Outside of Tai Chi, within Tai Chi, whatever, when we are doing that kind of claiming, we feel in body, mind centering that we're activating the lymph, that the white blood cells are all about saving territory, survival, fighting toxins, defending. So having some kind of both thymus related T cell development, spleen activity, and lymphatic pumping in and stretching out and then maintaining peripheral boundary is an example of more lymphatic work. So that's a biotensegrity based in the lymphatic system that I think underlies some of the Tai Chi work as one example.
Beautiful. Maybe Lisa or someone else who's been monitoring the chat. I haven't caught everybody's comments, and maybe if you guys want to propose any other questions to Martha. Yeah. Chris or Lisa.
Susan.
Go ahead, Lisa, you first.
Chris, do you have any questions on? I don't have any questions that maybe I've missed somebody, so please.
Yeah, I've got a question, a comment, something I'm curious to know, Martha. when Susan had her Bruce Hamilton structure and she was playing with it, and you started talking about this play between tension and compression in social dynamics, I found that super interesting, really appeals to me, something to investigate further. And I notice when you're speaking about movement, you're emphasizing tension and counter-tension. And I'm just curious to know, I don't know if you can answer this now, what would the exploration of inquiring into the play between that same play that you voiced when you were seeing, and I could see it, you were experiencing it in your body. I'm just really curious, what would happen if you take that same thought pattern, ideology, into your exploration of movement?
Thank you for that. There's so much going on, but right now I'm thinking a lot about affinity groups. So right now in the racial, like in, I think it was Tara that mentioned my grandmother's hands, and maybe several people did. So Resma Manakim is trained in somatic experiencing. He's developed something called cultural somatics. He's African-American, he lives in Minnesota. And he has asked us to really do our homework according to what racial group we're in. And he works with white, brown or black, and blue, because he feels that people in uniform have to really look at their own power and authority in a very different way, whether they're black or they're white. So I want to just say that when I think, as you were talking, Chris, so thank you for stimulating this thought, I was thinking of the affinity groups as more like a single cell. And we do have shapes in our body that are circular. Well, a lot of what we've been demonstrating today is tensile and more linear. But of course, then when I was out on the border, it's more arc-like, we would call it in the Laban work. And so then you have more rounded shapes. And so just thinking about the circle is pretty important. And the dodecahedron is sort of the closest we get to that from this beginning place of the tetrahedron. But what I want to get at is, yeah, there are times when maybe we don't want tensile forces and we want to just kind of hover and relax and be with our group and make mistakes without hurting anybody else. So when we're doing deep exposing kinds of work, like recognizing our white advantage, the unearned benefits that we have because we have white skin, that's something we should be talking about amongst ourselves. And for those of you that are of color in this room that I'm not even seeing, I apologize for assuming that majority. It unfortunately is a big part of the somatic field and embodiment field. But then I personally get jazzed. You see my enthusiasm when we get to be together and go into that interstitium, into that. So I actually am struggling with a course I teach called the Socially Conscious Body, whether we're going to deal with this racial affinity group model and only teach by race with different teachers of the same color, skin, leading, because I get so much from just being in more interaction and learning from each other. But we're at risk of more hurt during that.
Right, and yes, and a journey of
exactly
everybody to really claim our individual own space, but also as in, I keep switching views.
I'm sorry, I don't know what to do. Yeah.
Well, it's odd because what I see is what the YouTube people see.
Okay.
So, but what I was saying is, you know, be really clear in our own space, our own round, as you say, and then also in the very hierarchical way that we have that just emerges in the body can emerge also in community. I think we're talking the same language, and then also I don't have any what do I want to say, certified training in somatics. My somatic experience is one of just personal exploration, but also inquiring in the body as well. So thank you.
Can I ask, thank you, Chris, Can I ask Chris Frederick to unmute and turn on his video and ask his question that he just put in about stillness and movement? Because I know that Martha's only got a couple extra minutes here.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yep,
Can you see me?
yep.
Oh, wow, that's cool. My question, thank you very much. Hi, Martha, thank you so much for being with us and sharing your amazing experience and knowledge, but I'll get on to the question because I know our time is limited. In Qigong, we speak of movement within stillness, stillness within movement. I'm sure this kind of discussion is also within the yoga language and so on. Can you speak on experiencing biotensegrity if you have that ability of speaking on movement within stillness specifically? My personal experience is I feel my fluid body moving. I feel through the interstitium. So I'm really not moving my body per se. I'm standing barefoot in a pasture in my back field, and I actually feel the movement of the fluids and the energy as part of the biotensegrity experience. I was wondering if you can speak on that because it's not the actual movement on the external body, it's within.
Absolutely. I mean, I was part of the group in New York State that had to allow us to continue to touch people if we were not from a licensed profession. I forget the coalition's name, forgive me all, we worked together for so long, but I'm getting tired. So I'm sorry, I keep doing spotlight, but I'm just trying to make sure the frame is on me. There we go. Basically, we had to go to Albany and say, we're doing touch, but we're movement therapists, we're movement educators, and we're feeling movement even when people are still, because we're feeling, and we couldn't talk about blood flow because massage therapists get to move blood, but we could talk about anything else, cranial sacral fluid, we could talk about cell fluid, anything that they weren't already mandated. So we had to prove that we weren't massage therapists, that we didn't have to go train as massage therapists to do this kind of biotensegrity based movement work. And yes, we totally agree with you.
We had to prove that we didn't need rub or what was it?
Manipulate,
rub or
tap, right? Exactly. We could use the four tapotement, a fleuron, you know, all these kinds of movements. Actually, I'm trained as a massage therapist too, but you know, I couldn't say that I did. Well, you know, I have that knowledge because that was in Massachusetts, and I'm not allowed to bring it to New York. So anyway, that's boundaries and membranes again. But I will say, for instance, in the BMC work, we talk about 4 rhythms that exist in stillness. We talk about the breath rhythm. We talk about the blood rhythm. We talk about the autonomic nervous system rhythm. And we talk about the cranial sacral rhythm or the cerebrospinal fluid rhythm. So we're constantly tapping into these 4 rhythms and wondering which one is sort of more present depending on degree of anxiety or degree of rush or degree of peace and ease.
So Martha, it's almost 2:30. So I think, you know, I want to just give you a chance to maybe say any last thoughts you want to share with this community. We're so grateful to have you here today. Is there anything you want to share with us as a departing word?
Just thank you so much for this opportunity. It has brought up so many questions. I wrote emails to all sorts of people like Haresh Lavani, who does 4th dimensional, 5th dimensional spatial architecture, to say, Haresh, did Irmgard know Buckminster Fuller? And who made up the word tensegrity anyway? And have you heard of biotensegrity since you're married to a dancer who was the first East Indian dancer to bring and merge it with modern dance? So it's just the connectivity that is spawned by this group is truly phenomenal. I will never forget it exists, and I will try to visit as much as I can because I have as many questions as everybody else. I really want to learn more about the body, want to learn more about the social body and how we're going to work and survive on this planet. So thank you for all that you do, everybody.
Wow, Martha, thank you. I know you've got to go. I want to invite everybody else to hang out for a few more minutes.
I'm going to toast you while I'm still here. So anybody who has a cup.
Oh yeah, let's do the toast. Martha, you do the toast.
Oh, okay. So here's to finding both the lightness that comes from counter tension and the ability to flow through anything that feels like resistance.
Oh, beautiful.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Chugging down water. I'm tired.
That's
Thank you. I hope to see the rest of the recording because I'm really curious how this is, reverberating in everybody. And please stay in touch. I don't think I even put out like drmarthaeddy.com. So that's the easiest way to find me.
Martha, we're going to put all of your information in our follow-up email as well. Rachel is the producer of that. Rachel, do you want to add anything?
Do you need anything from me or?
I actually think I have everything. I can privately be in contact with you about what I'm going to include. And if you want to include anything else, then just let me know.
Terrific.
I just want to put a plug in. If anyone wants to join Martha for one of her body mind dance, sorry, I want to say it right.
Yeah, no, that's right. Body mind dancing.
Body mind dancing class. You're online, right? You're giving them online. So
they're mostly free. I mean, movement research, you make donation if you want, Laban Institute. But also, I actually have a workshop next week. It's on working with the reflexes, and that's very spatial work, actually. When the arm and leg comes together, when the head moves apart, it sets the tonus, both flexor and extensor tonus for the body. And it's going to be online because it's COVID. So it's 3 hours a day, 10 to 3, Wednesday, Thursday, 11 to 2.
In Eastern time,
Thursday
right?
and Friday, Eastern time next week. And it should be on the calendar at drmarthaeddy.com. So,
all right.
along with other things like the cancer work. So lovely to see you again. And Steve, thank you for spawning this amazing work. And I look forward to seeing you and being with you in the flesh and learning more from you. Thank you.
Come to Montreal.
Danny?
Me too.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. Bye.
Great to see you.
Okay.
Wow.